I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now and listen to me very carefully, because what I am about to tell you is not something I made up. It is not something I read online, and it is absolutely not something I have ever been able to explain to any scientist, any marine biologist, any psychologist, or any person on this earth who I have tried to tell it to. I was 60 feet underwater. I was sealed inside a pressurized metal cylinder in the middle of the Florida Keys. It was 3 in the morning. The ocean was completely black outside that porthole glass, and something was standing on the other side of it, standing, 60 feet underwater, looking directly at me. And before I tell you what it looked like, before I tell you what it did, I need you to understand one thing first. I am not a person who scares easily. I am not a person who imagines things. I spent years training for this mission. I passed every psychological evaluation they threw at me. And I went into that habitat as a believer in science, and I came out of it as something else entirely. So stay with me. Do not click away, because I promise you, by the time I reach the end of this story, you are going to understand why I have not slept a full night since I came back up from that ocean floor, and why 2 of the other aquanauts who were with me on that mission have asked me, repeatedly, never to say their names out loud in connection with what happened. They are still afraid. And honestly, so am I. My name is Daniel. I am a marine biologist. I was 28 years old when this happened, and I had spent the better part of 4 years working toward one single goal, being selected as an aquanaut for a mission at Aquarius Reef Base. If you do not know what Aquarius is, let me explain it to you, because understanding what that place is, what it actually feels like to be inside it, is essential to understanding why what happened to me was so deeply, fundamentally wrong. Aquarius Reef Base is the only underwater habitat in the world that is still actively used for scientific research. It sits on the ocean floor in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, about 9 miles offshore from Key Largo, at a depth of roughly 62 feet. It has been down there since 1993. The habitat itself looks, from the outside, like a giant yellow submarine that someone bolted to the ocean floor and forgot to bring back up. It is about 43 feet long and 9 feet in diameter. Inside, it is divided into compartments: a main lock where you enter and exit through a hatch in the floor, a wet porch where you store your dive gear, a bunk room, a galley, a workspace, and a bathroom. The walls are white. The lighting is fluorescent and constant. There are portholes, circular windows about 8 inches in diameter, spaced throughout the habitat, and through them at any hour of the day or night you can see the ocean, the reef, the fish, the darkness. The way the habitat works is through something called saturation diving. When you live inside Aquarius, the air pressure inside is maintained at the same pressure as the surrounding water at that depth. This means that your body becomes saturated with nitrogen over time, the same way a sponge becomes saturated with water. The upside of this is that you can dive outside the habitat for hours at a time without needing to decompress between dives the way a surface diver would. The downside, and this is the part they really make sure you understand before you agree to go down, is that once you are saturated, you cannot come up quickly. If something goes wrong inside the habitat, if there is a fire, if someone has a medical emergency, if you start to lose your mind, you cannot just swim to the surface. You have to decompress slowly over the course of about 17 hours. And during those 17 hours, you are still inside the habitat, still 60 feet underwater, still looking out through those portholes at whatever is looking back. The mission I was selected for was a 12-day saturation dive focused on coral reef ecology. There were 5 of us in the crew: myself, 2 other marine biologists named Garrett and Petra, an engineer named Sujin who maintained the habitat systems, and our mission commander, a veteran aquanaut named Ray who had been down to Aquarius 4 times before, and who had this very specific, very deliberate calmness about him that I found enormously reassuring at the time, and think about very differently now. We spent 3 weeks before the mission in intensive training on the surface, practicing emergency procedures, learning the layout of the habitat blind, getting psychologically evaluated, and going over the rules. The rules. I need to talk about the rules because this is where things start to get interesting, and where certain things started to feel, even before we went down, slightly wrong in a way I could not articulate. Some of the rules were obvious and practical. Never open the main lock hatch without checking pressure first. Always dive with a buddy. Always maintain radio contact with the topside team. Never exceed your dive time without authorization. Always check your oxygen levels before re-entering through the wet porch. But some of the rules were less obvious. And when I asked Ray about them during training, his answers were always just slightly too short, just slightly too quick, in a way that made me feel like there was a longer answer that he had decided not to give. Rule number 1 on this list was this: during the night hours, defined as 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the porthole covers must be closed. Every habitat has these porthole covers. They are circular metal discs that you can swing over the windows and latch shut from the inside, blocking out the view completely. During the day, we kept them open because the natural light filtering down from the surface was beautiful and the reef activity was something you wanted to watch. But at night, Ray told us the covers go closed. Every one of them. No exceptions. I asked him why. He said it was policy. I said, whose policy? He said the habitat management team. I said what was the reason behind the policy, and he looked at me for a moment in this very particular way. And then he said that at night, the light inside the habitat is brighter than the darkness outside, which means that anything outside can see in far more clearly than you can see out. And that the management team had found over the years that aquanauts who spent extended periods looking out through the portholes at night tended to develop anxiety and sleep disturbances. And that closing the covers was simply a precaution for the psychological well-being of the crew. That explanation made sense. It was rational. I accepted it and I moved on. But I remembered it later. I remembered it very specifically. Rule number 2. If at any point during the mission you hear knocking on the exterior of the habitat that cannot be explained by equipment, currents, or marine life, you are to log it in the incident report and notify the topside team immediately. You are not to open any hatch or porthole cover in response to the knocking. You are not to attempt to investigate the source of the knocking by diving. You are to log it, report it, and wait. I asked Ray if this had ever happened. He said yes, a few times over the years, usually caused by equipment that had broken loose from the habitat structure and was banging against the hull in the current. I asked if there had ever been knocking that turned out not to be equipment. He said no. His voice did not change at all when he said it, but his eyes moved, just slightly, just for a second, toward the floor, and then back to me. And he smiled and said, "Shall we move on?" And we moved on. Rule number 3 was the one that I found strangest at the time, though it seemed almost embarrassingly simple on the surface. The rule was this: if you wake up during the night for any reason, do not look out the porthole before closing the cover. If a porthole cover is open and you wake up in darkness, your first action should be to close it, not to look through it. Do not look first, close first. Then look if you want, but close first. I asked why. Ray said that disorientation upon waking in an underwater habitat could cause distress if the visual reference was the ocean at night rather than a familiar interior, and that the cover first protocol was to minimize that disorientation. Again, rational. Again, slightly too smooth. Again, I filed it away and moved on. We went down on a Tuesday morning. The descent itself was extraordinary. We rode down in a personnel transfer capsule and then swam the last bit through the entry hatch. And suddenly we were inside, and the world above us was gone, and there was nothing between us and the surface except 62 feet of dark Atlantic Ocean and 17 hours of decompression time. I remember the feeling very specifically. It was not claustrophobia. It was something more interesting than that. It was the feeling of having crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed, not quickly, not easily, not without consequences. It was the feeling of being committed. The first few days were extraordinary. We dove for hours every day, cataloging coral cover, tagging fish, taking water samples, running experiments. The reef outside Aquarius is genuinely one of the most beautiful places I have ever been. During the day, the water is this extraordinary blue-green color, and the light filters down from above in these shifting, dancing columns, and the coral is alive with color and movement, and it is impossible to feel afraid there. Impossible to feel anything except wonder. At night it was different, not because anything happened in the first few days. Nothing happened. We followed the rules. We closed the porthole covers at 10 p.m. We slept. We woke up. We dove. We were fine. But the night was different in a way I noticed even before anything happened. When the covers were closed and the fluorescent lights were humming and it was 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was lying in my bunk unable to sleep, which happened more than I expected, I was aware of the ocean in a way that I was not aware of it during the day. During the day, the ocean was something you could see, something you were part of, something generous and knowable. At night, with the covers closed and nothing visible, it became something else. It became a presence. An enormous, incomprehensible, indifferent presence that was on every side of me, above me and below me, and that I was separated from by a few inches of steel and some very confident engineering. And the habitat made sounds at night that it did not seem to make during the day, small creaks and groans and settlings that Ray said were perfectly normal thermal contractions as the water cooled, nothing to worry about. And I believed him, but they still kept me awake. On the 5th night, I woke up at approximately 3 in the morning. I do not know what woke me. Not a sound, not a movement, nothing I could identify. I simply opened my eyes and was immediately awake in a way that felt almost aggressive, like something had reached into my sleep and pulled me out of it by the collar. The habitat was dark. We kept the main lights off at night and ran on small amber emergency strips that gave everything a dim, orange-tinted glow. Garrett was in the bunk above me, breathing slowly and evenly. Petra was across the corridor in her bunk. Ray and Sujin were in the forward compartment. Everything was exactly as it should have been, and then I noticed that the porthole cover on the bunk compartment porthole was open. I do not know how it was open. I was certain, I was absolutely, completely certain that I had closed it before I went asleep. It was part of the routine. Close the covers, check the covers, go to sleep. I had done it. I knew I had done it. But the cover was open, swung back on its hinges, and through the 8-inch circular porthole, the ocean was visible. Black and lightless and completely featureless, just dark water pressing against the glass. I lay there for a moment looking at it. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I told myself it was just the disorientation Ray had talked about. I told myself I should close the cover, the way the rules said, and go back to sleep. I told myself this very clearly and specifically and with great conviction. And then I did not do it. Because I was looking at the porthole and something in the porthole moved. It was subtle. It was the subtlest thing. It was not a fish. I knew what fish looked like in the habitat lights at night. I had seen them on previous wake-ups when I had, against the rules, looked out before closing the cover, and they were just shapes, graceful and indifferent, slipping through the water. This was not that. This was something larger, and it was not moving through the water the way things that belong in the water move. It was moving slowly, deliberately, the way something moves when it is not swimming but positioning itself. And then it stopped, and it was right outside the porthole, right there. And I could see just enough of it in the faint light that spilled out from our amber strips to understand the following things. It was large, much larger than a human being. Whatever I was seeing through that porthole was not the whole of it. What I was seeing was just the part of it that was in front of the porthole, and that part alone was bigger than the porthole's entire frame of view. It was pale. Not white, not quite, but pale in a way that made it visible in the darkness where nothing else would have been visible. A deep-sea pallor, the kind of colorlessness that comes from spending a very long time in a place where sunlight does not reach. And it had an eye. One eye that I could see. Just one, positioned so that it was looking directly through the porthole glass, directly at the bunk, directly at me. I want to pause here and tell you something important. I know how this sounds. I know that you are listening to this and may be thinking it was a large fish, it was a whale shark, it was a grouper, it was a hallucination from the weird nitrogen-saturated atmosphere inside the habitat. It was a dream, it was a dream, it was a dream. I thought all of those things. I ran through every single one of them in real time, lying in that bunk, looking at that eye looking at me. I am a marine biologist. I know what lives in that ocean. I know what the large creatures of the Florida Reef look like and how they behave and what their eyes look like and how close they come to structures. And what I was looking at was none of those things. The eye I was looking at was not a fish eye. It was not structured like a fish eye. It was structured, God help me, it was structured more like a human eye than anything else. Large, extraordinarily large, but oriented the same way, focused, present, and this is the part I need you to hear very clearly, it blinked, not the slow lateral slide of a fish's eye, not the membranous flicker of a deep-sea creature. It blinked, the way a person blinks. Lid coming down from the top, sliding back up. Once, slow, deliberate, like an acknowledgement, I closed the cover. My hands were shaking so badly that I missed the latch the first time. I closed the cover and I lay back down and I did not sleep for the rest of the night. And in the morning when I tried to tell Garrett what I had seen, he looked at me for a long moment and then said, very quietly, "Was the porthole cover open when you woke up?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Mine was open last night too, 3 nights ago." And I looked out before I closed it, and he would not tell me what he saw. He would only say, "Close it faster next time. Close it without looking." That is the rule for a reason. I went to Ray that morning. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, without changing his expression, without moving. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Did it react to you? Did it do anything when it knew you could see it?" And I thought about the blink, and I said yes. And Ray closed his eyes for just a second and then opened them and said, "Okay, here is what you are going to do. You are going to close those covers every single night for the rest of this mission without fail. You are not going to look out after 10 p.m., not for any reason, not if you hear sounds, not if you see light through the seal, not under any circumstances. Do you understand me?" And I said, "Ray, what is it?" And he said, "I don't know what it is. I've been down here 4 times and I've seen it twice and I have never found anyone who can tell me what it is. What I know is that it has never broken through. What I know is that every aquanaut who has looked at it for too long starts to have trouble. Trouble sleeping, trouble thinking, trouble remembering why they wanted to come back up. So you close the cover, you don't look, and you finish your mission." "Okay," I said, "okay. But there was one more thing." I said, "Ray, why does it come here? Why does it come to this specific habitat?" And Ray was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "I think it's curious. I think it has been watching this habitat for a very long time, and I think it is trying to understand what we are." And I said, "Does it know we're alive in here?" And Ray said, "Yes. I think it absolutely does. And I think that is the problem. because so far it has only watched, and I would very much like to keep it that way. I closed the covers every night for the rest of the mission. I did not look out after 10 p.m. I lay in my bunk and I listened to the habitat creak, and I thought about what was on the other side of the wall, and I breathed very carefully and I counted the hours until morning. On the 9th night I heard knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the exterior hull, right at the level of the bunk compartment porthole. Evenly spaced, patient. I logged it in the incident report. I radioed topside. I did not open the cover. The knocking came again the next night, and the night after that. 3 knocks each time. Even, slow, patient. Like a question waiting to be answered. We completed our mission. We decompressed for 17 hours and we came back to the surface, and I stood on the boat in the Florida sunshine and I breathed salt air, and I felt the solid, ordinary world close around me like something I had never properly appreciated before. Garrett did not talk on the boat ride back. Petra looked at the water the whole way. Ray stood at the bow with his hands in his pockets and his face turned away from all of us. I have not gone back to Aquarius. I have been offered the opportunity twice since then. I turned both down without explaining why. Garrett also turned them down. Petra actually left marine biology entirely and now works in landscape architecture, as far as I know. And Ray retired from aquanaut missions 18 months after our dive. I ran into him at a conference 2 years later, and I asked him one more time, just one more time, what he thought it was. He looked at me for a long moment and then he said, "I think there are things in that ocean that have been there longer than we have been on this planet. And I think they are patient. And I think some of them have learned that this little yellow cylinder at the bottom of their ocean occasionally has things inside it worth watching." And then he picked up his drink and he walked away, and I have not spoken to him since. 3 knocks. Patient, slow, even, like a question. And the question is, I think it has always been, are you going to open this door? And I am telling you right now, from wherever you are listening to this, that the answer is no. The answer is no. The answer is always going to be no, because I looked into that eye. That enormous, pale, impossibly wrong eye. And whatever was behind it knew me. And that is the most frightening thing I have ever experienced in my life. Not that it was there, not that it was watching, but that it knew me, and it is still down there, and the porthole covers are still on those windows. And if you ever get the chance to go down to Aquarius Reef Base, and I hope you never do, close the covers at night. Close them without looking. That is the rule. That is the only rule that matters. Keep the covers closed. Story number 2. I want you to think about the loneliest place you have ever been. I want you to actually stop and picture it. Maybe it was a long drive through empty countryside at 2 in the morning. Maybe it was a hospital waiting room at 4 a.m. Maybe it was a city apartment where you could hear the whole building breathing around you, but there was no one there who knew your name. I want you to take that feeling, that specific, hollow, skin-prickling loneliness, and I want you to multiply it by about 1,000. And then I want you to put yourself inside a building that is shaking, that is physically shaking, vibrating in its bones, because outside the walls the wind is moving at 112 miles an hour across a flat white tundra that stretches in every direction for hundreds of miles with no trees, no hills, no structures, nothing, just ice and dark sky and distance. And you are the only human being for 60 miles in any direction. And it is 2 in the morning. And the satellite feed you are monitoring just went offline. And something is in the data. That is where I was. That is where this story starts. And I need you to stay with me, because I know it sounds like I am about to tell you a story about a blizzard and some equipment malfunctions. And I want you to understand from the very beginning that this is not that. This is not a story about weather. This is a story about what I found in the data. And what I found in the data should not exist. And what happened after I found it, what came to that building, What stood outside that door on a night when no living creature should have been within 60 miles of me is something I have been trying to find the right words for ever since I came home. So stay with me, please, because I need someone to know this. I have needed someone to know this for a very long time. My name is Owen. I am a data systems specialist, and for 14 months I worked as the night shift data manager at a remote atmospheric research station in the high Arctic. The station is operated jointly by 2 universities and a government meteorological agency. And for obvious reasons, I am not going to tell you exactly which station or exactly where, but I will tell you that it is on an island in the Canadian Arctic archipelago, which is one of the most remote and inhospitable places on the surface of this planet. The nearest settlement with a permanent population was 60 miles away by sea. In winter, the sea between us and that settlement was frozen, but the ice was not consistently safe to cross, and the distance was not walkable in extreme weather conditions anyway, which meant that for practical purposes, during the months I am going to tell you about, November through February, we were inaccessible. The station had a helicopter pad, but the helicopters did not fly in conditions below -40 Celsius with high winds, and conditions below -40 with high winds were, during those months, more common than not. Supply drops happen by arrangement in weather windows. If something went wrong with you at this station in January, help was not coming the same day. Help might not be coming for several days. You understood this before you took the job and you made your peace with it, or you didn't take the job. The station itself was not large. It was a collection of modules, interconnected by enclosed corridors, sitting on pilings above the permafrost. The main module had the control room, the communications equipment, the kitchen, and a common area. 3 residential modules, each with a small number of bunk-style bedrooms. A generator module that ran our power. An equipment module for the scientific instruments. In summer, the station ran with a full crew of 8 to 12 people, scientists, engineers, support staff. In winter, the crew was reduced to a skeleton team of 4, a station manager, 2 scientists who maintained the long-term data collection programs, and the night shift data manager, which was me. My job, technically, was to monitor the station's data systems during overnight hours, manage the satellite uplink and downlink schedules, troubleshoot any equipment issues that arose, and maintain the data archive. In practice, this meant that I sat alone in the control room from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. every single night, watching screens, running checks, drinking coffee, and listening to the wind. The other 3 crew members slept during my shift. If something went wrong with the equipment, I called them on the intercom. If something went wrong with me, if I felt ill, if I was frightened, if I simply needed to hear another human voice at 3 in the morning, I did not call them. That was the unspoken rule. You managed yourself. You maintained composure. You did your job. There were actual, explicit rules for the station, and some of them were as practical and obvious as you would expect. Never go outside alone in high wind conditions. Always file an exit log if you leave the station for any reason, including equipment checks. Keep all exterior doors sealed at all times except during necessary access. Maintain radio check-in schedule with the Regional Coordination Center every 6 hours. Back up all data to the offline drives every 24 hours. And then there were some rules that the outgoing data manager, a woman named Carla who I overlapped with for 3 days before she rotated out, told me in a very specific, quiet, careful way that told me she was not reading from a manual. She told me, if the wind speed sensors show readings above 100 miles per hour, do not go near the exterior doors. Not to check equipment, not for any reason. Wait until the wind drops. I said, is that a safety rule? She said, yes, partly. And partly it's something else. I asked her what else. She said that in extreme wind events, the infrasound generated by the storm, the very low frequency sound below the threshold of human hearing, could cause significant perceptual disturbances. Anxiety, hallucination, a sense of presence. It was a documented phenomenon, she said. A lot of polar researchers had experienced it. The trick was to know that it was happening so you didn't act on it. So if you feel like something is in the station with you during a major wind event, she said, it's the infrasound. It's not real. Don't go looking for it and don't go outside looking for the source of it. Just sit at your desk and wait. I said, has that ever happened to you? She looked at me for a moment and then she said, the infrasound affects everyone differently. Some people don't notice it at all. Some people notice it a lot. I am one of the people who notices it a lot. And then she picked up her bag and she did not say anything else about it. The second rule she gave me was this. The data archive going back 18 years contains a set of folders that are labeled with the prefix ANOM followed by a date. These are anomalous data logs, recordings and readings that fell outside the expected parameters and were set aside for later analysis. She said, when you are doing your archival checks, you will see these folders. You do not need to open them. You do not need to analyze them. They are there, they are logged, and they are waiting for the research team to look at them in the summer. Leave them alone. I asked why. She said it was a data integrity issue. The anomalous files had been flagged as potentially corrupted, and opening them could cause cross-contamination of the archive indexes. That was the technical reason she gave me. But when she said it, she looked at her hands. She didn't look at me. She looked at her hands, folded on the table, and she said it very carefully, the way you say something that is technically true but is not the whole truth. And I filed that away the same way I had filed away Ray's answers about the porthole rules. There was more there. I just didn't know what it was yet. My first 2 months were hard but manageable. The darkness was the thing that hit me hardest. In November and December above the Arctic Circle, there is no sun. There is the suggestion of twilight around noon for a few weeks, a dim blue glow on the horizon that lasts for an hour and then fades, and then there is nothing. Just dark. 24 hours of dark. And the wind. Always the wind, a constant presence, a voice that never stopped, that was sometimes low and grinding and sometimes screaming at a pitch that you felt in your jaw and your sinuses. And that was always there, always, every hour of every shift, a reminder that the world outside those walls was not interested in you. I developed my routines. I had my coffee at 9:30 and my tea at midnight and my second coffee at 3 a.m. I ran my system checks every 2 hours. I maintained the uplink schedule. I backed up the data. I read. I listened to music through headphones because the wind was oppressive when I could hear it clearly. I managed. The thing with the ANOM folders started in January. I was doing an archive integrity check, a routine scan that ran automatically but that I was supposed to supervise. And the check flagged one of the ANOM folders as containing a file that was scheduled to be auto-deleted, because its timestamp showed it as more than 30 days old and uncategorized. The auto-delete was a housekeeping function. The flag was asking me to confirm the deletion, and I was about to confirm it, about to just click yes and move on, when I noticed the file size. The file was labeled ANOM 110920017 audio 0034. November 9th, 2017. Audio file. 34 in a sequence, and it was 4.2 gigabytes. For a raw audio file, even at high sample rates, that is an enormous size. That is hours and hours of audio. I sat there with my cursor over the confirm deletion button and I thought about what Carla had said. Data integrity, corrupted files. Leave them alone. I deleted it. I confirmed the deletion. I moved on. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that I tried to follow the rule. I tried to leave it alone. And I did for 3 more weeks until the night in late January when the storm came. It was the biggest storm of the season. The Regional Coordination Center gave us 36 hours of warning. The low-pressure system was enormous and moving fast and was going to hit us directly. The station manager briefed us. We secured all exterior equipment, ran extra fuel to the generator module, stocked the control room with supplies in case interior movement became difficult. And then the storm hit, and within 4 hours the wind speed sensors were reading 108 miles an hour, and the building was shaking in a way that I cannot fully describe to you. Not a tremor, not a vibration, but a full, whole-body shaking, like the building itself was afraid, like it was alive and frightened. All 42,000 pounds of it trembling on its pilings while the wind screamed around the corners. It was 2:17 in the morning. I remember because I looked at the clock specifically when it happened. The satellite feed, which I had been maintaining against significant atmospheric interference all night, went offline. Not degraded, offline, complete loss of signal, which should not have been possible because we had primary and backup uplink systems and they were both running, but they were both gone. And when I ran the diagnostic came back with an error code I had never seen before. Not a hardware error, not an atmospheric error, an error that said in 3 lines of text, signal blocked, source unidentified, check local perimeter, check local perimeter. I had been running these systems for 4 months. I had never seen that instruction in an error code. I did not know what it meant. I called up the diagnostic manual on my secondary screen and searched for that error code and found nothing. It was not in the manual. It was not in the supplementary documentation. It was not in the troubleshooting database. It did not exist as far as the documentation was concerned. And yet there it was on my screen. Signal blocked, source unidentified, check local perimeter, and then the wind speed sensors spiked. They had been reading between 110 and 114 for the past 2 hours. Suddenly they jumped. 131, 139, 143, and then they dropped, not gradually. Instantly, in 1 second from 143 to 11, and then up again, 131, 143, down to 8, up to 137. The pattern was wrong. Wind doesn't behave like that. Wind speed in a storm rises and falls in curves, in waves, not in these sudden absolute drops and spikes. This was not the wind doing this. Something was interrupting the sensors in a pattern. Something was moving around the exterior of the station and passing in front of the sensors in a sequence, moving around the building in the storm, in wind that was 140 miles an hour. I want you to think about what that means. At 140 miles an hour, a person cannot stand. At 140 miles an hour, a human body becomes a projectile. Whatever was moving around that building in that wind was not affected by the wind, was not affected at all. The intercom to the residential module clicked on, not because anyone activated it from the other end, but just a click, like a connection being made. And then a sound, low, almost below hearing, just at the edge. It was the infrasound, I told myself. It was the infrasound that Carla had told me about. It was the storm generating low-frequency waves, and my brain was interpreting them as something. But even as I thought this, I was aware that the sound I was hearing had a rhythm to it. Low, irregular, but rhythmic, like breathing, very slow breathing, very large breathing. I did not go near the exterior doors. I followed that rule. I sat at my desk and I watched the sensor data skip and drop and spike in its wrong, deliberate pattern, and I listened to the rhythm at the edge of hearing, and I waited. And then I opened the ANOM folder. I know I had been told not to. I know Carla had said leave them alone. But the satellite was gone, and the sensors were wrong, and something was moving around my building. in a storm that should have been physically impossible to move in, and I needed to understand what I was looking at. So I opened the folder, and I looked at the files inside, and there were 41 of them, audio recordings going back to 2009, and the most recent one was from February of the previous year. And I opened the log file that accompanied it, just the log, just the text, not the audio, and I read what had been written there. The log was written by my predecessor, a man I had never met, and it said this: wind event on February 14th reached measured peak of 152 mph at 0230. Satellite uplink lost at 0247. Perimeter sensor anomaly began at 0251 showing movement pattern inconsistent with weather effects. Audio recording initiated per protocol. Duration 4 hours 11 minutes. Entity present for estimated 3 hours and 40 minutes based on sensor data. No breach. No contact. Recording archived per previous instruction. Note for next rotation. If you are reading this in the ANOM folder, you have had a night like mine. I am sorry. The rule about the folders is not about data integrity. It is because if you listen to the audio, you will hear your own name. And you will not be able to explain how. I closed the log. I did not open the audio. I followed that rule. I sat at my desk for the rest of the night and I did not move from it. And at 6:15 in the morning, the wind began to drop in the normal way, in curves and waves, and the satellite link came back online spontaneously at 6:42, and the perimeter sensors went back to reading one consistent wind speed and stayed there. And at 7 a.m., the station manager came in to relieve me and took one look at my face and said, "Bad night." And I said yes. And he poured himself a coffee and sat down and did not ask me anything else. And I went to my bunk and I lay there with my eyes open, and I thought about 41 audio recordings going back to 2009, each one 4 or 5 or 6 hours long, and in every single one of them, according to a note written by a man who was gone now, who I had never met and never would, in every single one of them, you could hear your own name. The name of whoever was on shift that night. The name spoken in the audio by whatever had been circling the building 41 times. Across 18 years, learning the name of every person inside, I finished my rotation. I came home. I left the job and I did not go back. I have never told the station manager what I read in that log file. I have never told anyone who was still working there, because I do not know what would happen if the people inside that station on a bad winter night knew that whatever was outside knew who they were. I think not knowing is the only thing that keeps you at your desk. I think not knowing is the only thing that keeps you from going to the door. I kept that rule. I did not go to the door, and I am home now, and I am warm, and I am telling you this because the records show that station is still running. There is still a night shift data manager up there right now, and somewhere in the archive there are 41 recordings. And if you ever find yourself in that control room at 2 in the morning, with the wind at 140 and the satellite down and the perimeter sensors going wrong in their deliberate, rhythmic way, stay at your desk. Do not open the ANOM folder. Do not go near the door. And whatever you hear at the edge of the wind, at the bottom of hearing, slow and vast and patient, do not answer it, even if it says your name. Especially if it says your name, stay at your desk. That is the only rule that matters. Story number 3. Before I tell you this story, I need you to do something for me. I need you to close your eyes for just a second, just 1 second, and imagine standing in complete darkness on a rocky, fog-covered beach, and around you in every direction in the dark and the fog you can hear sounds. Not animal sounds. Not the sounds you would expect from a beach at 3 in the morning. Human sounds. Moaning. Crying. Words that are almost words. Words that are on the edge of being language that your brain keeps trying to grab and decode and keeps failing, just barely failing like a radio station just off the frequency. And you cannot see anything. And you are alone. And the sounds are getting closer. Now open your eyes, because what I just described is not a nightmare. It is a Tuesday night in October on Bird Island, South Georgia, and it is the job I was paid to do. And I am going to tell you what happened out there in the dark and the fog, among the sounds that were almost human, on the night when I found something that had no business being there. Something that was not a seal. Something that was wearing the dark the way the fog wore the shore. Something that looked at me with a face that I have been trying to stop seeing every time I close my eyes for the past 3 years. So stay with me. I promise you, I am going to tell you everything. I am going to tell you the whole thing from the beginning. And by the time I reach the end, you are going to understand why I dropped my data recorder on that beach and ran, and why to this day I will not work anywhere near open water at night. My name is Callum. I was, a zoological field assistant. I had a degree in marine ecology, a strong stomach, a tolerance for cold and discomfort and isolation, and a genuine, deep enthusiasm for marine mammal research that I worked very hard at maintaining even in conditions that tested it significantly. I had worked with seal colonies in Scotland and Iceland in Norway, and when I was offered a position as a field assistant on Bird Island in South Georgia for a full season, 8 months, the austral summer and autumn, I was genuinely delighted. Bird Island is one of the most extraordinary wildlife research sites on Earth. It is a small island off the northwest tip of South Georgia in the sub-Antarctic, run by the British Antarctic Survey, and it is home to vast colonies of Antarctic fur seals, elephant seals, wandering albatross, macaroni penguins, and other species in numbers that would be difficult to believe if you had not seen them yourself. The British Antarctic Survey has maintained a research station on Bird Island continuously since 1962. The work done there is some of the most important long-term wildlife monitoring on the planet. I was stationed there to assist with the long-term fur seal monitoring program. This involved, among other things, identifying and logging tagged individuals, recording behavior observations, taking morphometric measurements of animals during regular capture sessions, and conducting nighttime data collection during the autumn pupping season. That last part, the nighttime data collection, is what I am here to tell you about tonight. During the pupping season, which at Bird Island runs through October and into November, female fur seals come ashore to give birth and nurse their pups. The females alternate between nursing periods on the beach and foraging trips at sea, sometimes leaving their pups alone on the beach for several days at a time. The pups, during this time, are vocal. They call for their mothers almost constantly when the mothers are away. And the mothers, when they return from the sea, navigate back to their specific pup among thousands of identical-looking pups on a dark, rocky beach by sound, each female recognizing her own pup's unique call, and each pup recognizing its own mother's response call. It is an extraordinary system. It is also, at 3 in the morning on a foggy beach, one of the most unsettling soundscapes I have ever experienced, because seal pup calls do not sound like animal calls. That is the thing nobody tells you until you are standing in the middle of them in the dark. They sound human. They are pitched in the range of a human infant's cry, sometimes of a human child, and they have a quality of anguish and desperation to them that triggers something very deep and very old in the human brain, the part that hears a child crying and cannot choose not to respond. And when you have thousands of them all calling at once at different pitches and rhythms, overlapping and echoing off the rocks and the water and the fog, it becomes something that is almost unbearable. You know it is seals. You know it intellectually, completely. But your nervous system does not know that. Your nervous system hears a beach full of crying children in the dark, and it does not care what you know intellectually. It fires every alarm it has. The rules for nighttime fieldwork on Bird Island were clear and specific, and I followed them completely, right up until the night I am going to tell you about. You always carry a head torch and a backup torch. You always carry a radio and check in with the station every hour. You always tell the duty officer your planned route before you go out. You always wear appropriate cold weather gear. Temperatures on Bird Island at night in October could drop to -10 with wind chill. You never approach a sleeping elephant seal from downwind because they are enormous and move with terrifying speed when startled. You watch your footing on the rocks because they are covered in kelp and seal excrement, and they are genuinely treacherous in the dark. And you never, ever lose track of where the ocean is. That one was drummed into me specifically by the senior researcher I was assisting, a woman named Dr. Frances Holt, who had been coming to Bird Island for 11 years and who had a very specific, very dry manner that I came to understand as the professional exterior of someone who had seen extraordinary things and had learned to hold them at arm's length. She said, "You always know where the ocean is, because the ocean does not announce itself on this island. The fog comes in fast and it removes your landmarks, and you can walk into the sea thinking you are walking onto flat ground, and the sea here is cold enough to kill you in minutes. So you always know where the ocean is." I knew where the ocean was. I was good at that part. What I was not prepared for, what no amount of training had prepared me for, was the night of October 19th, when the fog was at its worst, and the pup calls were at their highest, and the wind had dropped to almost nothing so that the sound carried in a way it did not on normal nights, traveling enormous distances, wrapping around the rocks, coming at you from every direction at once so that you could not locate the source of any individual sound. I was on the Lower East Beach, which was one of the main pupping beaches, doing my survey, moving slowly along a defined transect, counting pups and logging behavior observations, head torch on, recording device running, radio clipped to my chest. It was approximately 3:10 in the morning, and there was a sound that was wrong. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because everything on that beach at 3 a.m. was technically wrong from a human auditory comfort perspective. Everything was strange, everything was unsettling. But there is a difference between unsettling and wrong, and this sound was wrong in a way that was separate from the surrounding strangeness. It was coming from a specific direction to my left from a cluster of rocks about 40 meters away, and it was rhythmic in a way the seal calls were not. The seal calls were constant and overlapping and arrhythmic. This sound had a beat to it, a slow, deliberate beat, and it was lower than the pup calls, much lower. Low enough that I felt it in my chest as well as hearing it, and it was not a seal sound. I know seal sounds. I know fur seal sounds and elephant seal sounds and every variation and context of them. This was not one of them. I turned my head torch toward the rocks. The beam hit the fog and scattered as it always did, turning the air in front of me into a white wall that showed me nothing beyond about 10 meters. I could not see the rocks. I could only hear the sound, the slow, low, rhythmic sound. Coming from the rocks, steady, patient, like something breathing very slowly into the fog, like something that knew I could not see it and was not bothered by this. I stood still for a very long time. I want to be honest about that, it was not a few seconds. It was perhaps 2 or 3 minutes of standing still, listening, while everything in me said move, said go back, said this is the thing that is wrong and you should not stay near the wrong thing. And I did not move. Because I am a scientist, and the scientist part of me wanted to know what it was. The scientist part of me was pulling out a possible explanation, an unusual seal vocalization, a type I hadn't heard before, a juvenile elephant seal with an atypical call, some explanatory category that would make this make sense. So I did not move immediately. I stood and listened and tried to identify it. And then the sound stopped, all at once, completely, between one breath and the next, cut off. Not fading, stopped. The way a person stops making a sound when they become aware that someone is listening to them. The silence was, somehow, worse than the sound. In the surrounding chorus of pup calls and distant surf, this specific silence from that specific direction was somehow audible. It was the silence of something that had just decided to be quiet. And I became aware in that silence that the fog between me and those rocks had changed texture, that there was something in it. That the fog was not uniform from me to the rocks, that there was a shape in it, a shape that was darker than the fog around it, a shape that was about the size of a large person and that was oriented toward me, standing in the fog. 40 meters away on a beach where the nearest human being was the duty officer at the station 3/4 of a kilometer away. I said, and I know how this sounds, I said, hello, because I am an idiot. Because the scientist part of my brain had now produced a new explanation, which was that one of the other researchers had come out without telling me, which was against protocol but not impossible, and was standing in the fog for some reason I couldn't explain. So I said hello, and my voice sounded very small on that beach among all those crying pup sounds, and the hello sat in the fog for a moment and nothing responded to it. The shape moved. Not toward me, sideways. Along the line of the rocks, moving parallel to the water, moving slowly, deliberately. The way something moves when it is not retreating and not advancing but repositioning. And as it moved, I tracked it with my torch beam, and the beam showed me nothing but fog because it was too far and the fog was too dense, but the shape was darker than the fog and I could see the darkness of it moving in the whiteness of the beam reflection, and it was wrong. The way it moved was wrong. It was too fluid for a person, too slow. Nothing about the movement suggested weight or effort. It moved the way a shadow moves, without friction, without the mechanical business of locomotion, just a darkness transitioning from one place to another. And then it stopped, and it turned. The shape in the fog turned to face me. I could not see its face. I could not see anything specific. But I knew it was facing me the same way you know in a dark room when someone has turned to look at you, that absolute knowledge in the animal part of you that processes orientation and attention. It was facing me. It was looking at me through 40 meters of Arctic fog, and it made a sound. The sound was my name, not clearly, not in a human voice, not in any voice I could tell you the quality of or describe to you in musical terms, but it was my name. The shape of my name in sound. A vocalization that had the exact phoneme structure of my name, Callum, in something that was not a voice, but was attempting the function of a voice. Like something that had heard the word said enough times to reproduce the pattern of it without understanding what a voice was supposed to feel like from the inside. I dropped my data recorder. I heard it hit the rocks. I turned around and I ran, and I did not stop running for a very long time. I ran back to the station, and I knocked on the duty officer's door, and I woke him up, and I told him there was something on the East Beach, and he needed to radio the senior researcher. He looked at my face and picked up the radio without asking questions. Frances came to the station in 20 minutes in her outdoor gear with a torch, and she asked me to describe exactly what I had seen and heard, and I did, as precisely as I could. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Did it move toward you at any point?" And I said no. And she said, "Good." And I said, "Frances, what is it?" And she said, "I don't know what it is. I know that it has been on this island longer than the research station has. I know that it comes to the beaches during pupping season when the calling is loudest. I know that it learns. Every year it knows more than it knew the year before. When I first saw it 11 years ago, it just made sounds, seal sounds, the wrong seal sounds in the wrong rhythm. Now it knows names. It knows them by the end of the season. Every person on this island, it knows all our names. And I said, "What does it want?" And she looked at me with this very particular expression, not fear, something older and quieter than fear. And she said, "I think it wants to understand what we are. I think it is trying to communicate, and it does not know what communication is supposed to feel like from our side. I think it hears the pups calling and the mothers answering, and it understands that that is a system, that the calls mean something and the responses mean something. And I think it is trying to participate in the system. I think it is trying to call to us the way the pups call to their mothers. I think it is waiting to see if we come when it calls. I did not go back to the East Beach at night for the rest of my time on Bird Island. I completed my rotation in other areas, other beaches, other transects. Frances did not report what I had seen officially. She said there was a report system for unusual observations that went to a specific research office and had been going there for decades, and that the people who received those reports simply archived them because there was nothing else to do with them. She said she herself had reported it 7 times. She said she had never received a response. I came home at the end of the season. I am home now. I have not done marine mammal fieldwork since then, and I do not intend to return to it. Not because of the seals. The seals were extraordinary and beautiful, and I miss them. But because every time I am near the ocean at night, every time I hear a sound at the edge of hearing in the dark, I think about the shape in the fog. I think about the way it moved without friction. I think about the sound it made that was almost my name. And I think about what Frances said, that it is waiting to see if we come when it calls, that every year it knows more than it knew the year before, that it learns. It learned my name in October. By December, it would have known every name on the island, every person, all 4 of us standing in for the pups, standing in for the mothers, waiting to be called home from the sea. And if you ever find yourself on a remote beach at night in fog, surrounded by sounds that are almost human, and the sounds begin to have a rhythm, a slow, deliberate, patient rhythm, do not say hello. Do not stand still and listen. Do not wait to see what it is. Turn around, go back to the station. And whatever it calls after you, whatever phoneme-shaped sound comes out of the dark in the almost shape of your name, do not turn around. Do not answer. Because answering is what it is waiting for. Answering is the one thing that has never happened to it yet. And I do not know what happens to the person who finally answers. I am not going to be that person, and neither are you.